Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about Gauntlet II on the NES. If you played the first Gauntlet, then you know exactly what you're doing here. There's still no story. There really isn't anything different between the first Gauntlet and the second one. Aside from the NES port of the first Gauntlet, in my opinion, looking better and just being overall a better game than the second one. You still have your four characters, your warrior, Valkyrie, wizard, and elf, but you don't really select between them. You play as the warrior until the warrior dies, then you move on to the other characters, which I think is kinda crappy. Just like the first game, you were fighting off waves of mostly never-ending enemies. You've got your ghosts, goblins, weird things that shoot stuff at you, which I still haven't been able to identify, and just a bunch of other weird stuff that is supposed to be some kind of a monster, but I'm not totally sure. The levels are a bit more complex in this one than they were in the first, but it's still not really anything all that different. You collect keys, find doors, open those up, and you also can find some hidden switches that open up doors as well. And I use the term hidden switches kind of loosely because, they're right there flashing on the ground. You know exactly where you need to go in order to flip them. Like I said, I don't think this one looks as good as the NES version, or as the first version on the NES. There's just something weird about it. All of the characters kind of look the same, or at least don't have as much personality as they did in the NES port. The monsters don't look as good. Even, some of the treasures don't look as good. Really, just everything kind of looks a little bit worse. Like they, tried to make stuff better, but I don't know. I just don't think that the game looks as good as the other versions of it, or at least as the first version of the game does. It kind of has just a boring palette to it, especially with your characters all kind of having that reddish tint to them. In the first game, or at least the port of the first game, things look differently. Like your warrior had a different look to him than the elf, and everything like that. The wizard had a different look, and there were also different shades of there were also different colors. So, yeah, they just kind of looked better. The game felt a lot better, and everything like that. They do keep just the different levels being a different color and everything. I think some of the monsters look a little bit better, but overall they don't look as threatening as they did in the first game. I'm not really sure why, but they just sort of don't. There are also a lot of characters where or not really characters, there are a lot of monsters where I just don't really know what they're supposed to be. I've said this with a few Atari games, and that's what Gauntlet was originally. It was an Atari game. But they really kind of dropped the ball. Much like with Paperboy, they had a chance to kind of do something special with this, and they just sort of, just didn't really do anything. Until eventually Midway got a hold of it, and they managed to make Gauntlet, much better than the original arcade games were, or at least added some personality to it, and just made everything just everything much better than what it was in the Atari installments of it. Really, because you had four pretty recognizable characters in this. You could have given them names. You could have made a story about this that was a little bit more upfront in the games. You could have done a lot to really build off of this weird, very weird world that you've created. Because with the arcade game, you don't know why these monsters are doing what they're doing, unless you have the manual and it happens to be in there. I do not have the manual, and the game gives me no indication of, anything important really going on in this world. So, yeah, there's no story, nothing, just, yeah, it's a typical Atari arcade game. Well, I do have, quite a bit of negative things to say about it. Gauntlet 2 is still a fun game. It's still just as good as the first Gauntlet. You're doing the same stuff you were before. It's perfectly fine for what it is. It just has some issues with the fact that that Atari just kind of screwed themselves with it. They didn't build off of any of the stuff that was really made in the first game. And they didn't bother to, add a story into it, give you reasons why these characters are doing things, and they didn't do anything to really build a franchise, aside from, at least with this port, make the graphics worse, and that was pretty much about it. They made the levels more complex, and they just kind of made the game not look as good as it did before. At least on this version. I haven't seen the arcade ports, so I don't know exactly how different those would be. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if there are any other Atari franchises that you think probably could have done something, or at least been something more than what they were. I'll talk to you all later. Bye.